is no artist on Earth who could recreate the majestic beauty of our galaxy. Only the lonely eyes of the cosmic traveler knows the unspeakable truth.
We're again in the green room at Natty Greens with Kieran and Drew. And so we were talking about how you guys started working together at Drawbridge. And while, of course, you had to keep the bills paid, doing commercial work and everything, the company always had an eye for doing more narrative stuff. So how did you guys get started doing that? And what, you guys both actually co-wrote Harbinger. So what gave you the idea for that, and how did you start writing it?
Yeah, Kieran ultimately had the original idea for the film, which he came to Paul Fortesci, who was our director of photography. He came to the two of us. We had a creative meeting, and he said, I have an idea where I want this boy to be building this tower to the sky. Okay. And we're like, okay, you know, and he had gone, you know, beyond that, and he had pulled like music samples, and he had pulled some other reference videos, and the coolest thing he did was create this concept art that he had gotten a design student at NC State to create, and it was a concept art that looked like this boy was kind of on another planet, this sort of native planet, and it just really was intriguing and got us all talking, and that was the jumping off point for the story.
Give us a quick plot rundown of Harbinger.
Sure. So the log line is it's about an adopted 10-year-old boy who's climbing to the top of an oak tree in hopes of catching his unborn baby brother falling from space. So that's sort of the general log line that we tell people.
Very,
very
common.
Very normal.
Everybody's got a story like this.
But it's a fantasy drama set here in North Carolina, but ultimately it's a story about this mom and her adopted son.
Well, one of the things I thought was interesting is that it's in the beginning, he thinks that babies fall from the sky because that's what his mom told him. And you don't think anything about that at the beginning. That's not weird because parents make up all sorts of stories about where babies come from when they're 5-year-olds. Ask them where they come from. But it turns out, you find out later on that there's a specific reason why he hasn't been told the truth.
Yes.
And it's one of those things that, you know, in most films, when somebody's being dodgy about a subject, you kind of question that from the beginning, but it seemed perfectly natural in this one. Oh, obviously he made up a story about where babies come from. So I thought that worked out pretty cool.
Good, yeah. We struggled with that a lot because we were like, is this too far-fetched? But then we started thinking about how people talk about like a stork brings a baby and that's just sort of common sense for a lot of people. Like, oh yeah, that's what happens. Or, you know, you just don't want to get into the graphic details of it, even if it's not, you know, a tragedy behind it all. And so, yeah, I'm glad that it feels more like just sort of a common conversation that they had, and then you realize there's a lot more to it as the film goes on.
Now, when it comes to themes, and you're writing your script, do you have the theme, and is the theme one of the first things you come up with, or is that something that evolves out of the story? And in the particular case of Harbinger, when you're talking about that one thing that's going to be your fixed point, what was that, and how did you work around that?
Yeah, that's a great question, because I think there was a meeting where Drew and I was like, okay, what, you know, I think it was probably soon after we had gotten some criticism, like in an earlier draft, and we were just like, okay, well, you know, what do we know? What is the theme of this film? We had to ask ourselves that because, you know, we wanted to know, and I think we ended up, I remember Drew, and I think we both said it was unity, and we just circled that, and that was sort of the thing that we always knew we had to work back to get the film to where it was. So
yeah, because we knew it was a story about change and like sort of two people that are dealing with a major change in their life, but that we were trying to bring them back together. Like circumstances were pulling them apart, and we were trying to bring them back together. And so everything else was, you know, icing around that. But you know, I mean, I often think of themes first, or at least when I'm just like, what am I interested in? What you know, themes become kind of that ideal that you're striving for.
Right.
But then you sort of translate that into plot and character, and you hope those themes come with you when you do that.
And you hope that in the course of making a good story, you don't lose that idea.
Right. And you hopefully don't hit your audience over the head with your theme too much either. You know, like you want it to be buried in there somewhere, that it comes back out naturally when you're watching it.
And one of the other things that I really liked about your film is that normally indie films, and especially people's first feature films where they're writing dialogue and everything, a lot of the times the dialogue can be pretty rough to sit through. A lot of times it's really on the nose or awkward, or people are stating the themes outright. And I think you guys did a really good job of keeping it in the background, never smacking people upside the head.
Yeah, it was a lot of decisions in the writing and in the editing. I mean, there was even times that a line felt a little too much, we'd take it out, you know, in the editing. So yeah, it fortunately, I think we both like sort of intelligent, sophisticated stories that don't spoon feed too much, and so we actually had to push ourselves to be more clear and more obvious in some places, because it would have been easy to be just totally abstract and never answer any questions.
Yeah, it could have been a Malick film, you know.
Yeah.
But,
some people wanted it to be.
Some people did
We
want
had
it
a
to
test
be.
screening for a lot of filmmakers, and they're like, it just needs to be more dreamy, less dialogue, just take all the dialogue out, and just shots.
Did you have that scene where the kid's walking through the field with his
We
hand
actually do
across
have
the-
that.
We do have a scene.
It did not make the film, but we have that shot.
Yeah.
Our second unit DP was like, I need to get that shot, and I'm like, go
It's
get
the
it.
gladiator shot.
Go get it.
It's
Yeah.
just got to be there in case we need it.
In case we need it, it might end up on a
Might be on
trailer,
the trailer,
or something.
yeah.
But yeah, it's yeah.
So originally it wasn't grounded so much in reality. It was a little more.
We didn't really know. We
Fantastical?
talked about it either being like a fantasy reality sort of hybrid, or or there being complete fantasy sequences. We didn't really know, and that's how our creative process sort of led us down that path.
Yeah, I just had that initial idea, and I was like, "This is the concept art. Are you guys interested?" And I think once they saw that concept art, they're like, "Yeah, we're on board. We want to make this." And so then Drew came in, and we decided to figure out who this boy was. Why is he trying to get to the sky? You know, what's his backstory? And so we started having these, weekly writing sessions, and we would go, get coffee or a beer and just talk about the characters and what kind of story this could be.
So how did you guys collaborate? Did like one of you write a draft and then the other one took it and edited it and then you sent it back and forth, or were you like writing in the same room together?
Well, we had a lot of like sort of across the table discussions about character and sort of plotting and things like that. And then usually we would divide up scenes and go take a scene, you take a stab at it, you take a stab at it, we'd share it. We did a lot of sort of online sharing through.
Did you have to do a lot of outlining?
We had a fair amount of outlining. I mean, we wrote 6 or 7 drafts of the script, and they were all pretty different, which was pretty exciting. The first draft, from where it started to where it ended up, was a pretty big change, but it was good to sort of take that journey.
Yeah, I think the greatest part about it was that we were so open with our script. We had a network of people that we would constantly share the draft with and get feedback, and so that would really help shape the next draft. And like, okay, this isn't working. Let's see what we can do and move forward from that. So that was super helpful.
Right, feedback is really important. What kind of advice did you get? Was there something that somebody told you that made you completely rethink an idea you had?
Yeah, we definitely had, we had some very strong-minded people that had opinions, and that's great. We love people being honest and raw with us. I think, ultimately, like one of the biggest criticisms early on was that they couldn't relate to one of the characters. They found her to be not as likable, and you certainly want your audience to like your characters, otherwise you won't go on this journey with them. So,
especially if you're supposed to understand their perspective.
Exactly. They're not as sympathetic. So, that really helped. And we're like, okay, we need to rethink how this person is perceived and what she does in her actions.
Yeah, and just sort of our framework into the world. We had created like a mythology for all of this and sort of opened it up with this, sort of sprawling prologue type thing, explaining everything. And people kind of were like, well, that's interesting, but I'm actually more interested in the characters. Maybe you don't need as much of that, you know? And so that was really informative to allow us to kind of go back to the reality side of the story and trust that a little more and not feel like we needed this other fantasy layer on top as much.
Right. And it can be difficult. You want to have you want to figure out a lot of extra information so that the thing doesn't feel hollow, so it feels like you fleshed out the world, but then at the same time you come up with all this good stuff, and then you got to figure out what to cut off and what not to put in there, otherwise you end up with a bunch of extra junk.
Right.
So what's was that the biggest way you filtered that information was based on the feedback you got?
Yeah, I think so. And by like the 4th or 5th draft, we were a little more confident in what we were putting out there, and so like the feedback was sometimes like, oh, that's a good note, but we're not going to change that. Like in the early drafts, you're kind of like fishing for any guidance at that point because you just don't even know what you've got. But by the end, we were like, no, we feel pretty good about this. Even if you don't like it, this is what we're gonna do.
Yeah, I remember having a meeting with Drew where it's like, okay, what is the core of this that we cannot change? It has to stay the same, otherwise it will be a completely different project. So we had to figure out what those essentials were.
Right.
Yeah, because you want to blow it up and put it back together a lot of times, and at some point you have to solidify elements, or it can keep shifting and becoming something. And early on as a writer, I would write a script for years, and never be satisfied with it. And at some point we were kind of like, all right, where's our point of no return, where it's like we're moving into pre-production.
Exactly.
And that had to happen.
It's a pretty long short as it is. It's either just short of or just a little over a half hour.
Yeah.
And generally scripts, original drafts of scripts are a bit longer. Was this ever, borderline feature length? Did you ever have thoughts of it being a feature, or did you always say this is going to be a short?
We knew short mostly because we knew we could pull that off with limited resources and budget and everything else. I mean, I think that we talked about longer narrative elements that could have turned it into a feature, but we knew that wasn't a path that we could walk down.
Did you think it would be shorter initially when you first came up with the idea? You thought, 8-10 minute movie, and somehow it ballooned out to a half hour?
I don't know if we had like a timestamp necessarily. One thing that we definitely knew early on was that we didn't want this to be a small story.
Right.
A lot of short films, they are very small, but we wanted this film to kind of blow people away with how large the world was, like how many locations, how many different locations, how many different people this boy and this mom are interacting with. So it just felt big because we wanted to impress the audience. We wanted them to wonder, how did you guys, pull this off? This is impressive.
Yeah.
And we knew in terms of length, I mean, we were always fighting length, and I've dealt with festivals, and had a long short I made about 10 years ago, and you don't get into as many festivals if your short is longer, so you're constantly dealing with that. But I also realized that we needed the audience to have a certain amount of time to get to know the characters so that they can have an emotional reaction with them. If it was too short, it wouldn't be enough time to earn that relationship. And so we were constantly dealing with that on both ends of how long is too long, how short is too short. And the drafts varied in length, but we kept trying to make it shorter and shorter as it went.
Okay. And so how long did it take you to get to what you decided was going to be the final script when you said, all right, this is pre-production? A couple months?
Longer than that, I guess 9 months about, from like our first creative meeting to there being like the sort of production draft, I would say about 9 months.
Yeah.
I guess this counts as an indie film, even though it's financed by the company. Which I guess is another question a lot of people wonder when they're trying to make a film is, how do you get financing?
Great questions. Yeah, and it's definitely an indie film because Drawbridge, even though they're a company, Drawbridge is not a big company, and certainly it's one owner, and so he's as much of an independent, iconoclastic owner as anybody I know. So. Yeah, I mean, Kevin came to us and said, I will support you in this, but it would be great if you could find some more funding, because I don't want to pay for the whole thing myself.
Can you say what the budget was? Or at least the projected budget?
Well, the projected budget was going to be quite high. It was probably going to be around $40,000 or $50,000 budget, which is low for a film, but not necessarily for a short film. And so we set out with an initial crowdsourcing campaign to raise about $22,000 that way, and fell well short of that goal, which was surprising. We put out a lot of really good material and good content. We were constantly putting new info out there, and people were into it, but not in a way that was, bringing
Well, and this was during the pre-production process, so as you're coming up with costumes and some of the props and concept art and everything, you're able to share this and say, see, this is what we're trying to do.
Which is very cool. And so we did raise money that way, just not as much, and so we had to rethink our strategy a little bit, and then Drawbridge was able to match the funds that we raised. But, I mean, ultimately, if I had to put a number on what it ended up being, it was probably closer to a little over $10,000 for the whole thing. Yeah.
Oh, that's really good.
Yeah.
So what advice would you give for people trying to finance a film?
It's tricky. It is very tricky. I mean, I would certainly say, make sure that all your ducks are in a row first.
Right.
Because it's a huge investment of not only money but of your time, and you want to make sure that the right things are in place before you get started and start trying to shoot something.
And people are going to want to know that you know what the hell you're doing. If you say, I've got this idea, let me show
certainly.
you this trailer my friends and I took our little Sony camcorder from Best Buy out and shot in the woods, and it looks like junk.
Yeah.
Right.
Nobody's gonna think you're gonna do better.
Right.
Yeah,
You know.
and certainly there's, our director of photography, Paul Ferteschi, made a feature film on a micro budget of like $3,000.
wow.
So people have been able to do that. Ultimately, it comes down to the story and if that's engaging. And I think once you prove yourself, then it's easier for people to
Right.
say, okay, well, here's some money. I'm gonna help you with your next project.
Right. But the financing is always the biggest hurdle for any filmmaker, and particularly a short
Absolutely.
film, because going into it, there's a very low chance of a return on that investment. And so a lot of the crowdsourcing with Kickstarter and Indiegogo is a viable option, though we found that it's obviously becoming harder to get that money because there's so many projects and there's so
Right.
many things people are already giving to, that it's like, all right, I'm going to give you how much to make what exactly.
Absolutely, yeah.
And so then you've got the traditional methods of just asking people, door to door, friends and family, going to people in the community and saying we're doing this thing.
Yeah.
So it can be painful, I think in the early stages of your film career, you should try to make stuff for as cheaply and as freely as possible,
Yeah.
because
Right.
once you start maxing out credit cards and borrowing money from family and friends,
It
you're
could be a black hole.
you're
Yeah.
entering into a world that you may not be able to get out of.
It's certainly an expensive industry once you're buying the cameras and lighting and trying to pay actors, so it can add up very fast.
Right.
And part of working in corporate and for the production companies is that a lot of times you can kind of stir people up within the company to want to do something on the weekends, with the stuff they already have, and then you've
You got some resources, and also again that experience you got from working on that corporate work. You've learned how to shoot efficiently, how to maximize your resources and everything. How to be practical with what you got.
Right.
precisely.
So
It's, if anybody has good advice on how to raise money for a film, I'd be happy to hear it.
So your budget ended up being about a quarter of what you had originally planned. How did that affect the story? Did that force you to remove some of the more fantastical elements, or had you already decided to do that for narrative reasons?
No, we kept all that stuff. We didn't cut anything.
Oh, wow.
We unfortunately what we had to cut was paying the crew and paying a lot of the actors. We paid a few of the actors very low stipends. We paid certain crew members and certain skilled people for their resources and their time, but we had to go to the crew and say, hey, I know you guys are really into this. How into it are you really? And surprisingly, they were. Like, they kept showing up every weekend, even though we were out in the middle of the woods, out in the middle of nowhere. People would show up at 7 a.m. ready to shoot.
Yeah, because we didn't finance it, we had to schedule the film on weeknights and weekends. So we
Right.
were working straight, full time at Drawbridge, and then also going into the weekend and shooting 12 to 15-hour days, normally for
Yeah.
a film. So, yeah, it was really about creating that community of people that were just that interested
Really
and
dedicated
really
to the
dedicated
story.
and passionate about the film.
Yeah, that was the trick. That is the good piece of advice I would give to anybody: is make them care about your story, make them care about your characters, and you can get the crew, you can get actors, you can get other people that want to be there because of that, not
Right.
because of some other thing that you're trying to do, or you're going to make everybody famous. That doesn't work. But
Right.
if they believe in what they're making, they'll show up and they'll keep coming back. And if you treat them the right way. My philosophy with crews and sets is it's a community family experience. You feed people well, you treat people well, you're very respectful, you're very thankful of everything they do. And then, people like that versus
Right.
you tirade around and yell at everybody all day. They're not going to show up the next day.
So you actually get into the production process. How long what was your shooting schedule?
We shot over the fall of 2013, and I think it was 23 days of production.
Yeah, the production started in September and ended around December, and of course, that was staggered because we were shooting on weekends and weekdays or weeknights and stuff like that.
Now I gotta ask, you're working into December, and in a lot of those shots, there's people running around in short sleeve shirts and stuff.
Well, it was unseasonably warm that last year. I guess it's sort of warm here in the fall anyway. But yeah, there was some cold days. There was definitely. I think our main character, our main actor Christian, was cold a few times because we had to shoot everything out of sequence, and we were trying to cover like 3 scenes in one location. So he would be in a short sleeves and a shirt, and then he would switch into like a fall jacket, and then we were just constantly changing his wardrobe like every couple of hours.
Okay.
But But it was very warm. We had a weird fall last year where like the leaves like fell really quickly and they were just gone. And
The
then all of
weather
a
was
sudden,
weird.
It was
stayed
warm,
a
but
long
like the
time,
trees were barren, and so it
Yeah.
was a really like
Yeah.
this year. I'm looking. I'm like, oh, this is what fall.
This
is
is
supposed
what
to
we
look-
should have
This
shot.
is what we
Yeah,
wanted
this
the
is
film
when
to
we
look
should have
like.
done it.
But it didn't do it. You never know what you're going to get with fall
Yeah.
here. It's a moving target. So yeah.
Now, like you said, fall being a moving target, did that lead you to have to do some reshoots?
We did some pickup shoots, a lot of interior stuff. We shot a lot of plate shots.
Yeah, there was some stuff that we shot at Trailblazer Studio where we did. So the treehouse is actually a treehouse. You know that.
I saw
isn't-
some production photos where you actually had to get some of those shots looking in the window. You actually had to get a crane.
Yeah,
to look in.
we were fortunate enough to have a bucket truck for that day. So the treehouse was an interesting story because we didn't have it until maybe 2 or 3 days before we started shooting, and Drew actually had a great connection with Greg Paul Builders, which is a local construction company. He builds all these fantastic homes, and basically did it at the cost of the materials, built this treehouse in a day and a half.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
So, and it was a day and a half. It was probably a Tuesday that it came up, and we were starting to shoot on Friday. So, you know, and going back to this, you know, we didn't decide to take the treehouse out of it. You know, even though we didn't have the cost, we were like, it's gonna work. We're gonna make it happen. It's gonna come together, and it did. It was the
Yeah.
magic.
You got to be getting a little stressed out 2 days before the
Oh,
shoot.
it was
you don't
super
have
stressful.
treehouse.
Yeah, I mean the first quote we got for a treehouse was like $20,000, $30,000 for
To build a treehouse?
to build the treehouse we were describing as
Yeah.
this like really magical treehouse.
Wow.
And so I was like, thank you for your time, but no, we're gonna go with somebody else. And then yeah, my friend Greg was like, well, I've never built a treehouse before, and I'm like, okay, would you like to? He's like, sure.
Most people who build treehouses haven't done it before.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but this
There's not a
guy's
lot of
built.
zoning
This guy's been
codes.
building for
Yeah.
like 30 years, and you know deals with all these historical codes and everything. And so he got his guys together, and they put this thing together so fast. It was incredible to watch. And yeah, and the bucket truck we used was a friend of his who's a tree cutter that he uses, and so he came out for the day and brought his truck, and we filmed a bunch of shots from that, and we had a big jib, and I mean we had stuff that just sort of fell into our lap just because we had the right people involved.
And you have a lot of really, you know, stuff that doesn't look big, but when you realize how much things really cost to do, I was really amazed, you know, in addition to some of the treehouse stuff and some of the classroom shots and everything, but when you had the burning house. And I thought, wow, burning house, that is not cheap or easy to do. And not only that, you had the fire truck and the ambulance and everything. Well, if you're burning a house, you got to have a fire
Yeah,
truck
you
there
need that,
anyways.
yeah.
But how does that come about? How do you fit that into your budget? And what other kind of practical stuff did you have to worry about?
Well, that was a big worry. I vividly remember Kieran and I meeting to talk about sort of that we needed something else in the film, and this burning house entered into the conversation, and it was like one of those things where we're like, all right, well, let's write that down, and let's see if that's going to make it, you know, all the way to the end. But we had a brilliant locations manager, Carlene Kearley, who helped us find everything, and so we put her on the quest of contact all the fire departments and see if they're doing any organized training exercises, any sort of burns.
So that was a training exercise?
It was a training exercise.
Good call.
And so originally we had the fire department of Apex on board, and we had a house, and I had scouted it, and we were all set to shoot. And then I get a call from the owners of the property, and they're like, "Oh, we're just going to bulldoze it. It's cheaper." And so that house was just gone. And so then we were like, "Okay." And so we just didn't know what we were going to do. And then out of the blue, got a call from Mebane Fire Department, and they're like, "Well, yeah, we're doing a big burn. We're inviting all the different fire departments, and we're going to do it at night, which is unheard of because Apex is going to do it first thing in the morning because that's a lot safer and makes more sense."
Right.
Mebane was like, "No, we want to do it at night." And they're like, "You guys can do whatever you want. You can shoot anywhere you want, do whatever you want. You know, just don't burn yourself." And that was it. And they let us have carte blanche of what we wanted to do, and they were amazing to work with. And
Now, was the ambulance already on hand?
everything
or-
was there.
Oh, okay.
Everything was there. And that was, I mean, the hardest part was we hired a 2-year-old actor to be the boy in the house, and so we had to film with him prior to the burn in the house and create fire effects, and then he had to wait around for several hours while they started the fire, and then we had to shoot shots of him going to the ambulance. So it was a crazy night, but it was
Shooting with a 2-year-old in the middle of the night is probably pretty difficult.
it was
Yeah.
difficult. He was a trooper, and his mom was particularly skilled in helping us.
Now,
Yeah.
shooting in the house, I assume the fire effects are just lights.
Yeah, so
all lighting effects?
we worked out a lot of gags that would make it look real, and yeah, there was never
Couple smoke
never
machines, that
any
kind of
chance that kid was going to be near any
Right.
fire.
Well, I guess my question was going to be, inside to get the fire effects, you just got the lights, use some lighting effects and some smoke. Was that kind of your backup for the outdoor stuff if you couldn't actually get a house to burn? Just
Yeah,
kind
we
of some
talked
people
about
with
digital
lights on their
effects.
face?
We
Yeah.
talked about cutaways. We talked about, we had looked at what was it, End of Watch, or one of those kind of films that did a fire scene where you kind of
Yeah.
sensed that there was a fire, but you never really saw
Right.
much of the
Right.
fire. So we talked about a lot of different ways, but we always wanted to see,
Yeah,
a house on fire.
Again, show people stuff that they wouldn't expect to see in something that small.
exactly.
Now, one thing I'm really not used to seeing in something as small as your movie is the amazing cinematography. The shots just looked great. I love the colors. I love the composition.
Yeah.
And you guys, first let's give some love to your DP.
Yes,
tell me
please.
about
Yeah,
some of his stuff.
Paul Ferteschi works full-time at Drawbridge Media, and so he was always on board. It was sort of the three of us that were always spearheading this campaign to get this film made. So he was there from day one, which was fantastic because we were all on the same page.
Right.
I had, basically a color palette that I wanted to see in the film, and so he basically started creating swatches. And it was like, okay, we need to sort of utilize these colors, and how can we bring that out and keep the themes, fluid throughout the film. So, the blues and golds are always with Harold. You'll always see that, throughout the film. And, scenes where he's sort of not himself, those colors are sort of minimized. And so Paul knew that going into it, and so that made, I think, a huge difference.
Yeah, and then Kieran and Paul, we did great pre-pro work on all of our scenes. So we would go to each location. They would do full shot lister storyboards, with the lens, with the framing, and so we had all that stuff kind of practiced before we would get there. So there wasn't a whole lot of
Right.
need to rethink or discuss while we were filming. It
Yeah.
was all kind of known. So we had a very good production workflow on this, and one of the advantages, I wish I could repeat it, of shooting on weekends is that you sort of have a week between,
Yeah.
to think each scene through a little bit
Yeah.
more. Whereas if it was a straight, 20 days of shooting, you got to have the whole movie planned
Yep.
before you even start rolling.
Absolutely.
Whereas if you're doing little gaps along the way, as long as your actors don't cut their hair or leave or something, you're fine. But yeah, so we each week we could kind of go, okay, what are we shooting this weekend? What do we need? How long is that day going to take? What time do we need everybody there? It gave us time to sort of regroup and,
That's really
and prep as
beneficial.
we went. Yeah.
Yeah, the storyboards, I think, match pretty much accurately to the film. I definitely want to go back and sort of see the mirror image of that, which is fantastic that we stayed on the course and
Right.
came
And
out.
very simple way to do storyboard. We didn't draw a lot. Kieran did some drawings on the iPad with Sketch, but they also just had an app on the iPhone, and you could just select what lens you want, and we would just go stand in the shot and take
really?
it in the real location.
Oh.
And so we could
What's the
say,
name
all
of
right,
that app? That's pretty cool.
Shot Lister, and then there's there's Shot Lister for storyboarding, which is a great app, and then the viewfinder is called Artemis, and it just is basically a viewfinder for every type of camera. So we would just pull up the red prime lenses, and then we would know exactly what the focal length and what the framing would be, and so we knew that going in.
and
So
it
it
has
wa-
that data on the shot as well.
So not a lot of discussion when we got to set to film because we didn't
Yeah.
have time to do that
it's
anyway.
not like, what lens do we need here? You
Yeah.
just looked at the thing, and that was the lens. And
No,
so-
that's great. That's I was not aware of that. About
There's
those
so many.
apps.
I wish I need a tutorial as well. There's so many new production apps that are out there that people are creating all the time that
Right.
really can save you a lot of time once you get to use them.
It's fantastic that it ended up working out that your storyboards translated almost perfectly to the actual shots. I guess that that's the importance of the pre-production, right, and planning everything out.
Yeah, and it's saving time. It's not wasting people's time.
Mm-hmm.
Like nobody felt like they were just standing around not doing anything on
Right.
set.
So your ducks are in the row when you're on the set.
and,
Again,
yeah, and,
something
and
you
we're
learn
there
on
to get
commercials.
specific things, and everybody knows what we're there to get, and we're not, when the day's done, we go home. Like there's not a whole lot of oh, what if we did it this way,
Right.
So
So you mentioned the Red Epic. So tell us a little bit about that. What's it like working with that? Drawbridge actually owns a couple of those
Yes.
and the various lenses for it. So what's it like working with the Red?
The Red is a fantastic digital camera. I think when we started, there wasn't really any other 4K cameras out there, and it was always our goal to shoot the film in 5K and then master in 4K, which not a lot of local films are doing that. We wanted
Not a lot of people have the hard drive space for
No,
that.
no, they don't. And that was one of the things. So the edit, in dealing with the camera, we also had to figure out the post workflow. I just read an article about Gone Girl, Fincher's Gone Girl, and he did the same thing where he worked with a Red Epic, a Dragon, so he was shooting 6K for 5K, but then using Premiere, which is the same post software that
Really?
we
He
use
used
as
Premiere?
well. Yep.
Oh, I thought he usually used Final Cut. That's interesting.
Yeah, so this was his first time using Premiere. So that was interesting to see, a big Hollywood production doing the same workflow that we had done for this film. But yeah, you're right. You have to be conscious of, your space, and luckily Drawbridge is set up with a RAID system that we can back up everything and then finally go to LTO tapes. So we have all that footage stored away. But yeah, workflow was certainly very conscious on our minds when dealing with the Reds, but they're beautiful cameras.
I mean, the Red, obviously, it's a luxury to have something like that. Not many people do. And Kevin Wilde has been on board with Red since the very beginning. He had a Red 1, and, he's been part of that fanboy club for a long time. And so we knew that was what we were going to film on. We always knew that was the medium for this, and we wanted to shoot something in scope, and we wanted it to have a big look, and we wanted all the resolution to be there. And
Talk
so it's
about
great.
shooting at night with that thing, because I hear the Epic's pretty good at night.
It is. I mean, and obviously digital cameras now, you don't need as many lights at night as you used to be able to film a night exterior. And so that made things very possible to go out in the woods with like 2 or 3 lights and see everything we needed to see.
Yeah, we also had a pretty amazing virtual gaffer. We say virtual because he wasn't always on set, but he would always create light plots for us and give them to his key grip, who was on set with us, and so he would also provide us with a lot of HMI lights, which were very powerful night lights that we use.
So let's talk about editing, because a lot of times people say that that's the final place where you make your story. Your story gets written 3 times in writing and shooting and in editing. So tell us a little bit about the editing process. You said you used Premiere?
Yes.
And I guess the whole Adobe suite.
Yeah.
But tell us a little bit about your editing process.
Sure. So I did the initial edit on the film. Both Drew and I co-edited as well, which was great. So I went in and started building the selects and pulling, the takes that I really liked, and basically creating a string up that I then shared with Andrew and Paul and Kevin Wilde, and basically got feedback about how it was starting to look in the rough form. So it was very much like our writing process, where we were constantly showing drafts to one another. And then I think at one point where I had sort of like a fine cut put together, I think Drew came in and started tweaking scenes that we thought could use some work and might need to be trimmed and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Which was great. So we would jump, it would give me time to look at it with fresh eyes, and then he would take a stab at it, and then vice versa. And then we did have that filmmaker screening where we had this sort of almost lock cut where we felt like it was pretty good, but we needed sort of verification and feedback from people we respected in the community. And
Are we going to need the gladiator shot or not?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So they basically watched it, and we had them fill out, it was very, very formal. We had them fill out a little questionnaire and asked them what scenes they liked, what scenes they didn't like, what they thought, needed work, and that informed us for the lock cut. So,
we probably cut another 2 minutes off the film after that screening.
Oh, wow.
So, but yeah, it was a good process. Kieran did all the heavy lifting up front, and he needed to know all the material intimately and got it to a good place, and then I was able to come in and finesse and sort of work on certain sequences. And it was a lot like the writing, where you'd say, all right, you work on that sequence, I'll work on this sequence, and then we'll come back together and see what happens.
Were you able to use a lot of the location audio, or did you have to do a lot of ADR?
We thought we were going to have to ADR, and we ended up using all the location audio,
cool.
Which was really lucky in our case, because we did not have a dedicated audio person throughout the shoot. We had different people doing sound almost every time, because that's one of the jobs that doesn't work for free. Audio guys don't work for free, and so we had a lot of people like, I'd love to help you, but I just can't. It's on
I'm busy
principle.
with paying gigs
Yes,
that weekend.
exactly.
Right.
And so, but the best thing is our sound designer lives in LA, and so he was able to take what our raw files and make them so much better than what they were before.
Now, while we're on audio, tell us a little bit about the music, because I really like the soundtrack.
Yeah, as Drew mentioned before, we sort of identified the sound that we really liked early on with the concept writing, and I knew that I wanted a post-rock sound, very instrumental, but sort of a more harder, rougher sound, and we came across Goodbye Titan, which is a local Raleigh post-rock band, and we approached them. We're like, hey, kind of want you guys to score this film that we're working on. And they're like, yeah, let's do it. Like, they were all about it.
Yeah.
Cool.
So we used their existing music for our concept teaser trailers that we created during the Indiegogo fundraising phase.
Okay.
And that immediately linked the sound and the pictures, and people were immediately identifying them with Harbinger, which was fantastic.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, so it was like, yeah, they are the sound of the film, and it was just, it was a really good experience working with them.
Yeah, they were on board for about 2 years with us. I mean,
Oh, wow.
we met with them when we sort of had a rough idea. We had sort of, I think, a first draft maybe of the script, first or second draft, and we went to their studio and met with them. And they were like, yeah, we've always wanted to write film scores. That was what we got into this for in the first place.
Nice.
And so, yeah, but they had to wait out the shooting. They had to wait out the editing. They were sending us music before we were ready for it. You know, they were like, what do you think about this? And we're like, I don't know. We haven't put a scene together yet, but it sounds
It's
cool.
pretty collaborative.
It was very collaborative, yeah,
Good.
and they're really interesting guys and super talented, and sort of the band leader Alan Palmer works at Sound Pure in Durham, which is a recording studio.
Okay.
So they were able to do all of the mastering, and they laid down all the tracks there. I mean, they spent like 24 hours in the studio just straight
Oh, wow.
doing
Well, that saved you guys a lot of trouble with that. Yeah.
Well, yeah, because we had a locked cut. We had very specific notes. You know, there had been a lot of sort of sketches and back and forth of it should sound like this, no, it should sound like this. And then they just got in there and banged it out, mastered it, mixed it, and yeah. And now they've got, you can download the soundtrack on their Bandcamp page.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
So they're amazing. Yeah, I would definitely check them out live and pick up their albums.
I'd like to. I like that kind of music, and
Yeah.
it's nice to know that the soundtrack is available on its own.
Absolutely, yeah.
So, also in the editing process, I just wanted to touch on some of the visual effects. What kind of effects did you guys have to do? I noticed especially some of those night skies. A lot of stars in those skies.
Yeah.
No matter how good that red epic is.
It's not seeing all that.
Right. And the shot I'm specifically curious about is you have the shot where he climbs to the top of the tree, and you get the very wide shot with the sky, and he's up in the top of the tree. I'd like to know how you got that one.
He just climbed up there.
Yeah. Well, first off, I
50
just
feet in the air.
first
Don't
off,
tell OSHA. It's
Yeah,
all
I would
good.
just like to say that safety was extremely paramount for a
Yes.
sunset.
Yeah, we never made him do anything he
Yeah.
wasn't comfortable with or that we weren't comfortable with.
Yeah, and we did have someone from the fire department on scenes that he was up high that needed to be there. But for that, we couldn't actually get him, 80 feet up in the air. So the great thing was we brought on Derek Childress, who is a graphic artist he works at Centerline, and he basically was just like, yeah, I want to work with you guys, and sort of volunteered his time to work on the project. So we consulted him about how do we make these shots work, and what ended up happening was we ended up getting some studio time at Trailblazer to shoot Christian on green screen, and basically digitally insert him into the tree.
Okay.
Later on, in fact. So
So
would
you've
shoot.
got the shot of the tree, shot on location.
Yep.
Then you get shoot in the studio and just
Right.
place that in.
Well, and
then
that
add
shot
the
in
sky.
particular, I think Derek had to create that one from scratch because we didn't have the right framing he needed. So he created like a puppet version of our actor that he could move around
Oh, wow.
within the tree. But yeah, I mean, Derek did so much stuff. I mean, we knew we wanted to do everything as practically as we could, but there was obviously a height barrier that we needed to work with. So we created those tree effects in a lot of different ways, either in the green screen studio or like climbing to the top of a 100-foot tower with tree branches. We did that, and put the actor up in like a tower, like a real
A
fire
tower, yeah.
Okay.
to create a lot of the shots of him up high. That he's actually up that high. He's just on a platform.
Oh, cool.
And so we did a lot of different stuff, but we shot empty shots of the tree. We shot a lot of different pieces and parts, and we always wanted the effects to not seem like effects. We wanted
Right.
people to forget that wasn't real. And then to your question about the sky, we really struggled with that because we looked at a lot of digital skies that everybody's seen, and we're like, we don't want it to look like a digital sky. So Kieran met some guys from the Raleigh Astronomy Club, which is a night photography club of people that just want to shoot,
Right.
nebulas and supernovas and things like that with, really open shutters and high-powered lenses and stuff. And so these guys sent us a treasure trove of space shots and said, yeah, if you want to use them, use them. And so we were able to composite a lot of those sky shots into our existing footage.
It looks really nice, really neat. The movie looks amazing.
Well, what I particularly like about it is that other level of localness. You know, we could have easily have pulled some images from Joe Schmo, you know, on like some Creative Commons site.
Right.
But this is another part of the triangle. These are, you know, Raleigh photographers taking these images, and then we're incorporating that into the film.
Right. And like you said, that networking and community is important.
It is. I mean, that's what motivates me to do this and continue to do this, is that building those relationships and building the film community here comes from physically working with people that you see on a regular basis, not just dealing with somebody over an email or a phone call or something.
So you've got your film. Tell us a little bit about release, distribution, marketing plans, that kind of stuff.
So yeah, right now we're in the festival schedule. So we've submitted to probably a dozen or so festivals, waiting to hear back on almost all those, and then there's another wave coming up, you know, next month. So we're just following the release dates or the deadlines on festivals and sending off. We've done a lot of organized local screenings because we really think the best way to see the film is in a theater.
Right.
So we've shown it in several theaters.
Well, you shot it in 5K.
Yeah,
you know, put it on that.
So
big
we
screen.
want it big, yeah. So we got to show it at Mission Valley. We got to show it at the Hunt Library, and so we've had some really great screening opportunities. Long-term goal for me is to get it seen in Europe and Asia and places like that, where there is more of a shorts market, and there's kind of more of a business around short film in Europe, particularly. And so if we can get into some of those festivals, there's an opportunity to sell it for cable television or other kinds of things as a...
I was going to ask you about the monetization strategy. How do you intend to try to get your money back on your investment?
That's kind of the main things. So there's cash prizes for a lot of these European festivals, and then there's different distribution outlets where they'll take shorts and put them on a disc and try to sell those all together, or they have channels dedicated to short films. And so I don't anticipate that we're going to make bank on this thing, but if we could come close to breaking even, I think that would feel pretty good.
That would be nice, yeah. And did you, are you planning on putting it like behind a paywall on Vimeo for people to watch? Or?
Yeah, we've talked about that.
We've definitely talked about that. We're still looking at options. I mean, I think, you know, a lot of it is discovering the right path. And for me at least, I've found that making the film was really hard. Marketing the film is almost just as hard, because you really need to bang the drum and get people to take a look at it.
It's hard to get people to look at your stuff. I know what you mean, yeah.
Yeah. And that's the thing, is you're usually so tired physically and sort of mentally when you finish a movie that you just want to like release it and be done with it.
Wish we had a marketing guy so I could take a break.
Well, and that's what, you know, I would also advise for filmmakers is have somebody, you know, have your relay runner waiting for you when you get there and be like, can you take this and run with it? Because I'm tired. But yeah, that's now the hard work is making sure that the film gets seen and gets possibly picked up by somebody and has a final finish. We're designing a Blu-ray disc and doing all these other kinds of things because we want it at least to have a nice final resting place wherever it ends up.
Right. Well, that's awesome. It's a great movie. I loved it, and I encourage everybody who has a chance to go seek it out and watch this one, because it's really great. It supports a lot of local people, and I think it'll be a lot of fun. Thanks for talking to us about
Absolutely.
it.
You want to plug the website or anything?
Yeah, so if you're interested in Harbinger, you can go to www.harbingershortfilm.com, and you can find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram at Harbinger Film. So yeah.
Well, cool. Thanks.
Thank you.